Okay, today we're going to practice test-driven development on the Canary Android app. In order to do this, I want you to pull down my version of the Canary Android app from GitHub, and what you'll do is check out the 5-add-chart branch of that repo. Then, once you open it, the very first thing that we're going to do is run the tests. Here's how you run the tests in Android Studio. You first make sure that your configuration in the upper left-hand corner is set to project rather than Android, so that your directory structure gives you underneath app, source, and then under that test. Not Android test, but test. Under there, I want you to highlight the Java directory and hit the key binding Control-Shift-R. In Android Studio, that runs whatever directory you have selected, and in our case, it's the test directory. So you can see now, I think, that my tests are running. And what you'll notice is that when I pull up the report, all these green checks mean that these tests are passing, but these tests fail. The mood entry scatter analysis test file appears to have some tests failing. So let's take a look at that. So I've got the file open now, and I notice that I have 4 tests that have these fail indicators on them. These fail indicators belong to tests that focus on the text box immediately below the scatter plot on the Android app. So I'll show you that here when I run it. But the way that we are going to fix them is that we will write a test that reflects what we want the app to do, and then we're going to watch that test fail. Let me run the app rather than the tests here. It is. That gives us the safety net that we need if we want to be able to refactor or change this code later, so that we can do it with confidence that we have not broken anything. There's also testing in which we write the code and then later write the test to ensure that it works to prevent regressions. But test-driven development gives us an opportunity to, first of all, ensure that the test is testing what we think it is, and second of all, to help us think about the way that we want to design our code before we've written it. So that's what we're going to work on today. So let me show you this app. All right, so now if we look at our trends fragment, we see this text box, and it says, this text box is pretty useless so far. It would be great if this text box contained some useful information about the trends in my mood, wouldn't it? So that's not particularly helpful text for the text box to have, and that's what you're going to fix in our TDD exercise today. So you'll notice these tests indicate some stuff that maybe that text box should say instead of this rather useless message that it has. For example, it says, this test says, the comments, when there aren't many mood entries, encourage more mood logging. So in other words, when we don't have enough moods logged for this scatter plot to show much, this text box should encourage people to log their mood more often. Maybe it'll say something like, you should log your mood over the next 3 days or something. Then we have comments when mood is improving, mention that mood is improving. So what this is saying is that when our scatter plot shows a consistent trend from the lower left upward towards the upper right, maybe we want to say your mood is improving. That's exciting. Or however you want to implement that. Maybe you want to make it just so that you make sure all of the ones towards the end are higher than the ones towards the beginning, or however you want to determine that mood is improving. Similarly, we have a test here that says that when mood is declining, our comments should mention that the mood is declining. And then finally, when there's one outlier mood, we want to mention any notes from that mood. So, these are our 4 tests that we're going to work on. Now, I want to point out something about this code that's designed to make it relatively easy for you to keep the tests and the implementation in a very small, scope in the app. You shouldn't have to go around to all multiple files to fix this. Instead, here's what we're going to do. These tests are the mood entry scatter analysis tests. So, when I visit the implementation file, the mood entry scatter analysis file, I see that I have this function called comment on. It takes in a list of mood entries and it returns a string. Now in the trends fragment, which you won't need to change, by the way, we have mood entry scatter analysis as a dependency already. And what we do is we say, we set the text view that is the trend commentary, we set its text to whatever is returned from the scatter analysis's comment on method. So you won't have to change trends fragment at all. Whatever string you return from this method is automatically going to get displayed on the app right here. So let's see how we might use TDD to change what shows up right there on the application. If I go into the test, let me implement when mood is improving, mention that mood is improving. I'm going to implement this one and show you how I might go about implementing this so that you can see how this exercise will go for all of these tests. First, I'm going to remove this generic fail message. Now, any unit test like this has 3 parts: given, when, and then. The given block sets up the environment in which our code is designed to run. That's the scenario that we want to check on. The when block is where we run the code that we want to test. That's the event that we want to verify something about. The then block is where we put the things that we expect to have happen when this test runs, when this code is executed. In this case, our given block is going to be the moods that we're going to pass into the comment on method. So this whole file is testing the methods in the mood entry scatter analysis class. So that's our system under test. Now what we want to do is pass a list of mood entries into that method and see that the string that comes out is what we expect it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow this list of mood entries from another test and put that in my given block. Here I'm going to name it improving moods. And I'm going to make sure that the first one is upset, maybe the second one is upset. So in the beginning, it's upset. And then at the end, we have elated. So this person's mood improved. Now when we call system under test.comment on my set of improving moods, I should get a string out. I'm going to save that string to a variable, and I'm going to do it with Command Option V. Comment on. I'm going to name this variable instead improving moods comment. Okay, time for me to write my then block. This is where I assert any expectations I have about what the code's supposed to look like. So I'm going to assert that improving moods comment is equal to, what string should we use here? I'm glad you're feeling better now than you were earlier. Okay. Now, you'll notice that I put the string first and improving moods comment second. That's because assert equals expects the expected value to be the first argument and the actual value to be the second argument. So we can look at that by hitting Command P inside the parentheses, and it shows all the different kinds of arguments that assert equals can take. The one that we're on is expected and actual. So that's our assertion. Let's run this test. We can run an individual test by placing our cursor inside the test and hitting Control-Shift-R. That's going to run just the one test. And it failed. Let's look at why it failed. We have a comparison failure. Expected, I'm glad you're feeling better now than you were earlier. But what we actually got was, this text box is pretty useless so far. It would be great if this text box could provide more information about the trends in my mood, wouldn't it? Now the reason that's happening is because in the mood entry scatter analysis implementation, we haven't changed anything. We've written this test that indicates what we want our code to do, but we haven't made our code do it yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this string. I'm glad you're feeling better now than you were earlier. And I'm going to bring it over here to the comment on method. Now, what's the easiest way for me to get this test to pass? I can replace this string with that string. I use Control-R to run my test again. And this time, we see that it passes. Now, this code isn't much smarter than the code that we've written before. Instead of having that other placeholder message, now it's always going to say, I'm glad you're feeling better now than you were earlier. That's not always going to be the case for people. Maybe they have declining mood. Or maybe they don't have any moods registered at all. Or maybe they just have one outlier mood. What you're going to work on in this exercise is testing and then implementing all of those different scenarios. You have tests for each of those stubbed out right here in your mood entry scatter analysis test. Eventually, the comment on method in mood entry scatter analysis will contain some conditional logic where you analyze the data that you pass in the mood entries list and determine which response is going to be appropriate for that data.